All right, the first division. Dividing radicals is very simple. All you have to do is divide the numbers that are inside the radical. Now, this number is not. You see a 2 and a 2, but this is not a 2 and a 2. This is a 2 and a radical 2. This dude cannot be divided by this 2, but I can divide the 2 into the 10. So you're literally just doing this. Radical 10 divided by 2, which is radical 5. Now the 2 has to stay there. And then radical 10 divided by radical 2 is radical 5, right? Because 10 divided by 2 is 5. In the jail, in the jail. Alternately, you can do this. You can take radical 10 and write it as radical 5 times radical 2, because radical 5 times radical 2 is radical 10, right? 5 times 2 is 10. Now, this radical 2 and this radical 2 wipe out, and you get 2 radical 5. It's usually easier to do this. If you want to just divide them in your head, divide them in your head, okay? So you can do that. All right, so this is the second one. Now, again, you can take the 3 that's outside the radicals, outside the jail, leave him outside. You can do radical 20 divided by 5, right? Now, what's 20 divided by 5? 20 divided by 5 is 4. The problem is that radical 4 is a perfect square. He's on my list. He comes out of jail as a 2. So you do 3 times 2 and get 6. And again, if you would prefer, you can take radical 20 and write it as radical 4 times radical 5, 5 times 4. Cross out the radical 5s. He comes out of jail as 2. You get the same thing, and you get your 6. So if you want to split the radical 20 up, I mean, you'd have to split this up to break it down anyway if you wanted to, but you can split them up, cross out the radical 5s. Either way, if you want to just do the division, do the division. Make sure, the mistake I see people make here is they do radical 20 divided by radical 5 and they write 4. This is not 4. This is radical 4. They're both in the radicals, so you got to keep him in the jail, okay? So be careful there. All right, so the third example, this one is a much harder one. So again, I can't divide 7 into 3, but I can divide 7 into 21. So now I have 4 radical 21 over 7 times radical 3. Now, 21 divided by 7 is 3. Radical 3. And then you already have a radical 3 there. So now I'm going to hook up the radical 3s. Radical 3 and radical 3 make radical 9, right? But radical 9 is 3. He comes out of jail, pow, and he hooks up with his buddy who was waiting for him. Okay? Now, to be honest with you, to avoid the mistake of losing the, because like I said, some people will take this and they'll just write 3, right? They'll do radical 21 divided by radical 7, and they'll put a 3 instead of radical 3, and they'll get it wrong, right? This person would have 12 radical 3 as their answer, which isn't right. So if you want to try to avoid that mistake, on a problem like this, I actually like taking the radical 21 and writing it as radical 7 times radical 3, right? So this was 21. This radical 3 goes along for the ride, all over radical 7, and then you cross these out. Radical 7 and radical 7 cross out. These two make a 3, right? Radical 3 times radical 3 is 3, right? Radical 9, and you get 12. To be honest with you, I prefer to do this. I think this is easier to do. And in the last example I do, you're going to see that I don't have a choice but to do that. All right, the final problem. I have 3 radical 10 times radical 14 divided by radical 35. This time, nothing divides. 10 is not divisible by 35, and 14 is not divisible by 35. So now you're going to watch very closely what I'm going to do. I'm going to take radical 10, and I'm going to write it as radical 5 times radical 2. I'm going to take radical 14, and I'm going to write it as radical 7 times radical 2. Now, why did I do that? Because I'm going to take 35 on the bottom, And I'm going to write 35 as radical 7 times radical 5, right? 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 2 is 10. 7 times 2 is 14. Now, cross out the radical 5s. Yay! Cross out the radical 7s, right? They go away. So you're left with 3 times radical 2, radical 2. Radical 2 and radical 2 make radical 4. Radical 4 comes out of jail as 2. And you hook it up with the 3 that was in the front waiting. In this case, you had no choice but to split it all up. The radicals here do not divide evenly. So you had to do this. You had to split them all up into smaller radicals and then cross out the ones that they had in common.